Welcome to the show, Our Democracy, The CJR Show. In this show, we will discuss questions of democracy, governance, elections, and other topical issues in Guyana and occurrences in countries around the world. We hope the show will be of interest to everyone. So let's begin the show. Good day. Welcome to another in the series Our Democracy, the CJR Show. Today is Wednesday, July 16th, 2025. For today's show, I will discuss two topics with you. First, we will look at what I describe as a price to pay for holding tight to conspiracy theories. And second, I will look at the importance of unimpeded access for election observer missions to the elections in Guyana. So let's begin with the first topic, which is a price to pay for holding tight to conspiracy theories. From behind police barriers or barricades mounted to keep the peace and good order for the handing over of political party activists of political party lists of candidates for the general and regional elections, Mr. Aubrey Norton gave a stand-up interview to media representatives. In the funny-looking interview, because of where and how it took place, Mr. Norton expressed dissatisfaction with the procedures for handing over his list of candidates to GCOM. He called for a total revamping. Rather than answering the question, he called for a total revamping of the constitutional body, GCOM, which he asserted was doing everything to please the PPPC and to rig the upcoming elections in favor of the PPP. If one were to cast their minds back to the list of issues the APNU and other opposition forces have been casting around since 2020, it would come as no surprise that now, as a presidential candidate, Mr. Norton persists with his penchant for conspiracy theories. Unsurprisingly, his three representatives at the commission waste no time in the efforts to keep stirring the brew. Having lost the elections in 2020, the APNU-AFC immediately launched a smear campaign against GCOM, especially the chairman and the CEO. They concocted a slew of fabrications by stoking the lie that the PPPC had quote-unquote lost the election and was quote-unquote installed in government by external forces. Incidentally, over the past 3 years or so, having been badly damaged from the battering they received in the aftermath of the 2020 election, they withdrew and are now busily wooing and serenading the same external forces who they once rejected and even tried to eject from the Ashman's building. By 2022, they complained falsely that persons who were not in Guyana and whose names were not on the voters list had voted in the elections, throwing their votes in favor of the PPPC. What evidence they have of this, only heaven knows. They further claim that individuals who had impersonated deceased or dead persons had voted. This is something new. In fact, this is what the PPPC had accused the PNC ever since 1968 up to 1985. Later, they claim that they had in their possession the statements of poll to prove that elections were rigged to keep them out of office. And as though those were not sufficient, they started drumming up claims that non-nationals were being handed ID cards and that would allow them to vote at the local government and future elections. As opposition leader and now presidential candidate, Mr. Norton has somehow managed to downplay and put to rest these outlandish propagandistic fabrications. But at the same time, his team at the commission have managed to crank up a whole new series of conspiratorially inspired theories about potential for voter fraud linked to the introduction of biometric, so-called bloated voters list, and above all, GCOM that is weighted against them. The problem with the PNC conspiracy theorists is the more they talk about lack of confidence in GCOM and flaws in the electoral process, the more their supporters are likely to believe what their leaders tell them. So long as they continue to peddle these falsehoods, the whole approach will be one of distrust. So why would PNC supporters want to participate in a process after they were repeatedly told by their leaders that their vote would not count? In the circumstances, a low voter turnout of the electors, supportive of the APNU will obviously benefit the PPPC and others who will not hesitate to join in a feast on the carcass of the APNU. The big question facing Mr. Norton, his party members and supporters, is what is likely to be the fallout from the open revolt over his leadership attributes and administrative decisions about a host of issues that has since resulted in the hemorrhaging of erstwhile senior members of his party in the face of an impending election. Only after elections we will know that. As has already been established, Mr. Norton will find it challenging to put the genie back in the bottle. After spending years telling the audiences that GCOM is not ready and is incapable of holding free and fair elections, rather than helping to keep their supporters mobilized, it most probably will dissuade their supporters from turning out to vote in large numbers, thus making their arguments against GCOM come to nothing. Perhaps Mr. Norton should continue, and his members in the commission should continue talking along those lines. The bigger challenge, however, facing Mr. Norton is a strategic, if not a minimalist one. That is, how to re-enter Parliament this time around with no less than 31 seats, including the 9 AFC seats he once controlled in the National Assembly. This time around, he will not benefit from the AFC votes, since whatever the AFC receives, if any at all, in terms of votes, it would only reflect the number he controls in Parliament. The Norton's position will be further weakened due to the fact that 4 of his former MPs bolted and went off in different directions. That, in addition to the increasing pull from his base by the win factor. A worst case scenario would spell disaster for Mr. Norton and a crisis in the leadership of his party. Now let's go to the next issue. The importance of unimpeded access for election observer missions to Guyana. Given the history of claims and counterclaims of fraudulent elections in our country, its complex political and social peculiarities, and the prevalence of misinformation, the upcoming general and regional elections necessitate robust measures to ensure credibility and fairness for all stakeholders. In order to ensure that the aforementioned conditions are honored, tripartite agreements between the Government of Guyana have been signed between international organizations and the Guyana Elections Commission, paving the way for the presence of International Election Observer Mission, called EOMs, that already have been signed. The agreements allow for the EOMs unimpeded access to GCOM officials at each stage of our country's electoral process, from beginning to end. This is a crucial component of our elections architecture if it is to be stamped as being free and fair. As far back as up to 1980, neither local or international election observer missions were allowed to observe elections in Guyana. Demands to invite such missions were rejected by the Bonham government time and again. And years after, when some came unofficially or individually, on arrival, they were harassed, intimidated, physically assaulted, or threatened to be declared persona non grata. This was the period when, in 1973, the military intervened in elections, seized ballot boxes, took them to undisclosed locations where the boxes were opened, and votes in favor of the PPP were removed. Freshly marked ballots were inserted in favor of the PNC in these ballot boxes. But it did not only happen in 1973. This occurred also in 1978 referendum and the 1980 election. In June 1978, Chedi Jagan, the then opposition leader, tabled a motion in the National Assembly calling on the PNC government to invite the Human Rights Commission, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, to observe the July 10th referendum. The motion was ignored. However, for the first time in 1980, an 11-member independent elections observer mission, led by Lord Avebury, chairman of the UK Parliamentary Human Rights Group, was allowed to enter the country, but was not recognized by the PNC government, who refused to grant them any facilities whatsoever. Two members of the group, Lord Avebury's observer mission, was twice arrested and detained by the police in Georgetown on elections day. Mr. Dennis Daly, an attorney at law and chairman of the Jamaica Council for Human Rights, who was part of that observer mission, was arrested and detained in Berbice for hours by the police on polling day. In 1985, the government categorically rejected a request from three prestigious international bodies, including the Geneva-based International Commission of Jurists, the British Parliamentary Human Rights Group, and the US-based America's Watch. They all applied for permission to enter Guyana to examine Guyana's electoral laws and procedures. Lord Chitnis led the British Parliamentary Human Rights Group that mission. Ultimately, having not received any permission to enter Guyana, the organization decided to journey to Trinidad and there set up their tent to meet with representatives of Guyanese political and social groups, including the late Dr. Makepeace Richmond of the Liberator Party, David De Cjr, representing the Guyana Bar Association, and Dr. Chedi Jagan, the then opposition leader, as well as UC Quayana of the WPA, among others. A British journalist by the name of Anthony Jenkins, who had arrived in the country to observe the 1985 election, accompanied Dr. Jagan on his visits to polling stations on the east coast of Demerara. Dr. Jagan had responded to complaints by persons who claimed that they were being denied the right to vote, even though their names were on the voters list. In that area as well, PPP polling agents were kicked out of polling stations. The situation assumed such seriousness at the Haslington-Nabakalas area that the journalist Jenkins felt he and Dr. Jagan was in danger of being lynched when they were mobbed by gun-toting PNC thugs who surrounded them. Jenkins was physically assaulted and robbed. With the passage of time came 1992 elections, and a number of sweeping electoral reforms because of pressure externally was initiated in Guyana. Among those electoral reforms, the presence of observers, of international observers, were invited to observe our election and be given unimpeded access to election officials. But just as it was becoming a norm, the APNU broke with tradition and restricted these delegations to observe the election and even start to remove them from the country. This occurred also in 2020 when the PNC sought to disrupt the counting process at the Ashburns building. That is why it is important to remind how important it is for elections observers to be present to observe our electoral process in Guyana. It is important to remind that such missions play a crucial role in promoting transparency throughout the electoral process. Their unfettered access to GCOM officials allows observers to scrutinize the Commission's operation, including the handling of voter registration, ballot counting, and the tabulation of results. This scrutiny helps to deter voter fraud and irregularities, fostering public trust in the election outcome. Moreover, access to GCOM officials enables election observers from overseas to verify the integrity of the electoral process at every stage. This includes observing the training of election staff, the distribution of election materials, the conduct of voting, and the counting of ballots. By directly interacting with GCOM officials, observers can assess whether established procedures are being followed and whether any irregularities have surfaced. Through access to GCOM officials, election observer missions get to understand the Commission's communication strategy and to assess the accuracy of information being provided to the public This can help identify and debunk false claims, such as the one that was recently published, claiming that GCOM will publish results of these elections the following night. That had to be clarified and corrected by GCOM by way of a press release. The presence of election observer missions and their ability to interact freely with GCOM officials can significantly boost public confidence in the electoral process. When these observers are able to independently assess GCOM's electoral procedures, their findings are more likely to be accepted by the public. Unimpeded access to GCOM officials allow these observers to gather the necessary information to make informed judgments, to provide constructive feedback to the relevant stakeholders. Their recommendations can help strengthen the electoral system and prevent any irregularities that they may have observed. By granting unimpeded access to election observer missions, Guyana will demonstrate its long-held commitment to the upholding of international standards and norms for democratic elections. Under these conditions, Guyana will demonstrate once again its commitment to the principles and for the enhancement of its international standing insofar as democracy, free and fair elections, and good government are concerned. This has brought me to the end of today's show. Please be advised that my podcast will continue on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Podcast will continue as usual on Saturdays at 5 o'clock. I look forward to meeting with you once again on Saturday, July 19, 2025 at 5 o'clock. Please do not forget to press the like and share button and subscribe to the CJR Show. I welcome and encourage you to share your views with me on the topics I discussed today or on any other topic you may have in mind. Goodbye.